The harsh fluorescent lights of Westmont High did little to dispel the gloom that clung to Ethan Miller. At 16, Ethan navigated the labyrinthine hallways with a quiet determination, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of teenage chatter and locker slams that assaulted his senses. He was a student of keen intellect, capable of complex calculations and insightful observations, but his autism made the unspoken rules of social interaction a bewildering maze. Every whispered joke felt aimed at him, every fleeting glance a judgment. His world, a vibrant tapestry of facts and figures, often frayed at the edges when confronted with the unpredictable tapestry of human emotion. His greatest anchor, his unwavering beacon in this tempest, was his older sister, Sarah, a senior. Sarah was a whirlwind of fierce loyalty and sharp wit, her fiery red hair a visual representation of her protective spirit. She'd been Ethan's shield since childhood, deflecting the slings and arrows of thoughtless classmates. Every morning, she'd walk him to his first class, a silent ritual that grounded him for the day ahead. "Just breathe, Eth," she'd often whisper, a simple mantra that helped him weather the storm. Today, however, even Sarah's presence felt like a fragile barrier. The air in the cafeteria was thick with the scent of stale pizza and adolescent angst. Ethan, clutching his carefully packed lunch, tried to find a quiet corner, a place where the cacophony wouldn't overwhelm him. But quiet corners were a luxury rarely afforded to him at Westmont. His eyes, wide and searching, scanned the crowded tables, each filled with laughing, gesturing teenagers. He saw them then, a menacing cluster near the back. Mark, the Hammer Jensen, and his usual enforcers, Vince and Chad. Mark, a hulking mass of muscle and misplaced aggression, ruled the school's social hierarchy with an iron fist. His nickname wasn't for show. He used it to pummel spirits, sometimes even bodies. Today, Ethan felt his gaze, sharp and cold, pierce through the din. Ethan tried to look away, to become invisible, a trick he'd perfected over the years. But Mark was relentless, his cruelty almost surgical in its precision. He enjoyed the hunt, the slow, agonizing torment of his prey. Well, if it isn't little Einstein," Mark's voice boomed across the cafeteria, loud enough to silence a few nearby tables, drawing unwanted attention to Ethan. Ethan flinched, his shoulders hunching defensively. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers starting, like a buzzing swarm of insects. Sarah, who was a few tables away with her friends, stiffened. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Mark approach Ethan, a predatory grin on his face. She started to rise, but Ethan, with a quick, almost imperceptible shake of his head, subtly signaled her to stay put. He knew confronting Mark directly often made things worse, drawing more attention, escalating the humiliation. Mark stopped in front of Ethan, his shadow falling over the small boy, engulfing him. Vince and Chad flanked him, their smirks mirroring their leaders. "What's in the brown bag today, Brainiac? More of your special sensory-friendly mush," Mark taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm, emphasizing the words sensory-friendly with exaggerated air quotes. A few snickers rippled through the cafeteria. Ethan clutched his lunch bag tighter, his knuckles white. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, the familiar dread washing over him. He focused on a tiny speck of dirt on the floor, trying to block out the noise, the stares, the burning humiliation. "You know, I heard he needs special crayons to draw outside the lines." Chad chimed in, eliciting more snickers. "Or maybe he just needs a map to find his way out of the bathroom." "Right. Einstein," Vince added, prompting a wave of laughter from Mark's group. Ethan's face flushed. The restroom, his only true sanctuary in this chaotic place, had been violated, even if only in mockery. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, trying to control the tremor in his hands. Mark leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, though still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You know, Miller, you're a real freak. always mumbling to yourself, flapping your hands. You belong in a cage, not in a school with normal people. He then, with a swift, unexpected move, snatched Ethan's lunch bag. Ethan gasped, his carefully prepared meal, a small comfort in his day, now in Mark's grasp. "Hey, give that back." His voice was small, reedy, barely audible above the rising laughter. Mark held the bag high, just out of Ethan's reach. "Oh, little baby wants his food. Ah, too bad. Looks like someone forgot to pack a leash for his special needs." He then, with a malicious grin, squeezed the bag hard, crushing Ethan's sandwich, squashing his fruit. He then dropped the mangled bag onto the floor, deliberately stepping on it with his heavy boot, grinding the contents into the linoleum. A wave of shock rippled through the cafeteria, followed by an uncomfortable silence. Even some of Mark's less devoted followers seemed to cringe. This was a new low. Ethan stared at his ruined lunch, a lump forming in his throat. It wasn't just the food, it was the deliberate cruelty, the casual destruction of something he cherished. His eyes welled up, but he fought back the tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction. He could feel Sarah's furious gaze on Mark, a silent promise of retribution. "That's enough." "Mark," Sarah's voice, sharp and laced with fury, cut through the tension. She was on her feet now, striding towards them, her friends trailing hesitantly behind her. Mark merely chuckled, unbothered. "Oh, look, the big sister's here to protect her little baby brother. What are you gonna do?" Miller cried to Mommy. "Leave him alone, you coward!" Sarah retorted, stopping just a few feet from Mark. Her fists clenched. "You think you're tough picking on someone smaller than you, someone who can't fight back." "He can't fight back because he's a freak," Vince sneered, enjoying the show. "That's not fair," Ethan mumbled, his voice trembling, tears finally blurring his vision. He hated being called a freak, hated the helplessness that washed over him. Mark's eyes hardened. He took a step towards Sarah, his bulk intimidating. "Watch your mouth, Miller, or maybe you want a taste of what your brother gets." Sarah didn't back down. "You touch me, and you'll regret it. Jensen, my dad's a Marine." It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to deter him. Her father was indeed a former Marine, but he was currently deployed overseas, leaving Sarah as the primary guardian. Mark paused, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The Marine dad threat was a known deterrent, though he doubted its immediate relevance. Still, he wasn't looking for a direct confrontation with Sarah, not when she had witnesses. He was more interested in humiliating Ethan. He turned back to Ethan, who was still staring at his ruined lunch, trying to suppress a sob. "This is your last warning. Miller, stay out of our way, and clean up your mess. Freak." Mark then turned and, with his cronies in tow, swaggered out of the cafeteria, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Sarah rushed to Ethan's side, dropping to her knees. "Ethan, are you okay? Don't listen to him. He's just a jerk." She put a comforting arm around him, her anger warring with her concern. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. The humiliation was a physical ache, a burning sensation behind his eyes. He could feel the lingering stares, the pitying glances. All he wanted was to disappear. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, helping him up. She cast a venomous look at the ruined lunch on the floor. "We'll go tell Principal Thompson. This is unacceptable." Ethan nodded, eager to escape the cafeteria, the oppressive weight of all those eyes. He knew telling Principal Thompson would lead to a temporary suspension for Mark, maybe a detention, but it wouldn't stop him. Mark always found a way. Always. As they walked out, Ethan felt a chill, a premonition of something worse, something more sinister, lingering in the air. The small victory of enduring the cafeteria humiliation felt hollow, a prelude to a storm he knew was gathering. The incident in the cafeteria was a festering wound for Ethan, and a burning indignity for Sarah, Principal Thompson, a woman perpetually overwhelmed by the daily dramas of high school, issued Mark a 2-day in-school suspension. It was a slap on the wrist, a hollow victory that neither Ethan nor Sarah believed would deter him. Mark, defiant as ever, glared at them in the hallway, a silent promise of future torment in his eyes. The next few days were a tense tightrope walk for Ethan. He tried to blend into the background, to become a ghost in the crowded corridors, but Mark Jensen wasn't one to let a target off easy. His harassment, previously overt and loud, became more insidious. Whispers followed Ethan like shadows. Text messages, anonymously sent, popped up on his phone, filled with cruel taunts and fabricated rumors. His locker was occasionally found jammed, his textbooks rearranged in mocking patterns. These small, constant aggressions chipped away at his fragile sense of security. Ethan's routine, meticulously constructed for his comfort, began to crumble under the relentless pressure. The loud noises in the cafeteria became unbearable. The jostling crowds in the hallways felt like a physical assault. He started skipping lunch, hiding in the library, or sometimes just retreating to the boys' restroom during the busiest periods. The restroom, with its predictable acoustics and relative solitude, had become his unlikely sanctuary. It was a quiet, tiled space where he could regulate his breathing, count the grout lines, and regain some semblance of calm. One Tuesday afternoon, the air at Westmont High felt particularly charged. A pep rally for the upcoming football game was scheduled, filling the school with a chaotic energy that was pure sensory overload for Ethan. The blaring music from the gymnasium, the excited shouts, the constant movement. It was all too much. His head throbbed, his skin tingled with an unbearable sensitivity. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the prelude to a meltdown. He had to escape, without a word to Sarah, who was busy with a debate club meeting. Ethan slipped away from his last class. He hurried down the deserted hallway, his footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum, each one a desperate plea for silence. His destination was clear, the boys' restroom on the first floor, the one furthest from the gym, usually quiet during school events. He pushed open the heavy wooden door. The familiar squeak, a small comfort. The sudden quiet was a balm to his frazzled nerves. He walked to the furthest stall, intending to simply sit there for a few minutes, to gather himself. But as he reached for the latch, the door of the restroom suddenly slammed shut, rattling the tiled walls. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the room into an unsettling gloom, broken only by slivers of light from under the main door. Ethan froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He wasn't alone. A low chuckle echoed from the darkness. Then another. And another. Well. A voice sneered, instantly recognizable. Mark. Look what we have here. Little Ethan, hiding in his favorite toilet palace. Ethan's breath hitched. He spun around, trying to discern shapes in the dimness. He could make out 3 hulking figures, Mark, Vince, and Chad. His sanctuary had been breached. "What do you want?" Ethan stammered, his voice thin with fear. His hands began to flap involuntarily, a self-soothing mechanism he couldn't control. "Oh, nothing much," Vince said, his voice laced with mock innocence. "Just came to pay you a visit, buddy. Heard you weren't feeling so good. Needed a little cheering up." Chad's laugh was a sharp, grating sound. "Yeah, we figured you were lonely. What's wrong?" "Einstein can't handle a little noise. Is your special little brain melting?" Mark stepped closer, his silhouette looming over Ethan. "You know, Miller, you really piss me off. Always acting like you're better than us, always getting away with things. 2 days suspension. That's nothing. You need a real lesson." Ethan backed away until his back hit the cold tiled wall. He could feel the panic rising, a suffocating wave that threatened to drown him. "Leave me alone," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, I just want to be left alone." "Aw, listen to the little crybaby," Mark mocked, stepping closer, his face a menacing blur in the dim light. "What are you going to do, flap your hands at us until we go away? Or maybe you'll just start screaming. Huh. Like a banshee." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out their cruel words, the mocking laughter. He could feel their presence, oppressive and suffocating. He tried to focus on his breathing, on counting, on anything to anchor himself. But his mind was racing, overwhelmed by the fear. "You know, this bathroom's a great place for secrets," Vince whispered, his voice dangerously close to Ethan's ear. "No one ever comes in here during the rally. Perfect place for a little chat." "Yeah, a private lesson," Chad added, and Ethan heard the click of a stall door locking. They were blocking his escape. Mark's voice was low, menacing. "You think you can just run and hide? Miller, you think you can escape us? We're everywhere, and nobody cares about a freak like you." He then roughly shoved Ethan against the wall. Ethan cried out, the impact jarring him. "What are you going to do?" Ethan whispered, tears now streaming down his face, his body trembling uncontrollably. "We're just going to make sure you remember your place," Mark snarled. "And maybe teach you a little lesson about respect, the hard way." As the bullies closed in on Ethan, their cruel laughter echoing in the darkened restroom, a different kind of drama was unfolding outside the school. Sarah Miller, her debate club meeting having ended earlier than expected, had a nagging feeling of unease. She hadn't seen Ethan since lunch, and the cafeteria incident kept replaying in her mind. Ethan wasn't one to simply disappear, especially during such a chaotic event as a pep rally. Her gut twisted. She knew his usual hiding spots: the library, an empty classroom, or the boys' restroom. She checked the library first, then a few empty classrooms, her anxiety mounting with each empty room. Finally, her steps quickened as she headed towards the first-floor restroom. Meanwhile, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the front of Westmont High. The man who emerged from the driver's side was a study in quiet power. Tall, with a lean, muscular build, and eyes that held the wisdom of countless trials. Captain David Thorne exuded an aura of calm authority. His cropped dark hair and disciplined posture spoke of a military background. He wore a simple, dark polo shirt and jeans, but his presence was anything but ordinary. Thorne wasn't there for a pep rally. He was in town on a deeply personal mission, one that had been years in the making. He was looking for someone he hadn't seen in a very long time, someone connected to a past life, a past he rarely spoke of. The school was a detour, a lead he was following, though he wasn't sure why. He had a vague address, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years: Miller. As Thorne approached the school building, the distant roar of the pep rally reached him, but his trained ears picked up something else, a faint, almost imperceptible sound of muffled struggle, a cry, coming from somewhere within the building, near the restroom area. His instincts, honed by years of combat and high-stakes operations, flared. It was the sound of distress, of a victim. He quickened his pace, his eyes scanning the area, assessing the environment with the precision of a predator. He saw a young woman, her red hair a fiery beacon, rushing frantically towards the restroom, her face etched with panic. It was Sarah. Thorne didn't know her, not yet, but her distress was unmistakable. He also noticed a subtle shift in the air, a tension that wasn't just the usual high school chaos. Thorne didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with practiced speed. He didn't call 911 immediately. He knew the local police response time. Instead, he made a direct, secure call. "Hawk to Viper," he murmured into the phone, his voice low and urgent. "Situational awareness. Westmont High. First-floor restrooms. Possible hostile engagement. Need eyes and boots. 10 minutes. Tops." He didn't wait for a response, just disconnected. He was calling in his former SEAL comrades, men he trusted implicitly, men who would drop everything to be there. no questions asked. He then moved with purpose, his steps silent, towards the sound of the muffled cries, now knowing that the girl, Sarah, was heading into a dangerous situation. He didn't know the full story, but he recognized the signs: a vulnerable target, an enclosed space, and the presence of aggressors. He was no longer just David Thorne on a personal quest. He was a SEAL, responding to a threat. The clock was ticking. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as she raced towards the boys' restroom. The muffled sounds she heard confirmed her worst fears. Fear twisted into a cold knot in her stomach, quickly replaced by a surge of furious adrenaline. "Ethan," she cried out, her voice a desperate plea as she slammed against the heavy wooden door. It was locked. "Hey, open up," she yelled, pounding on the door with her fists. "Mark, I know you're in there. Let my brother go." Inside, the bullies paused. Mark chuckled, a cruel, mocking sound. "Sounds like Big Sis is here to save the day," he sneered, looking at Ethan, who was cowering against the wall. "Too bad. She can't get in." Vince added, "Yeah, she'll just stand out there and cry." Sarah continued to pound, desperation mounting. She could hear Ethan's whimpers, the snickers of the bullies. Panic clawed at her throat. She looked around, her eyes darting frantically. There had to be another way. Someone. Anyone. Who could help. The school was a ghost town, everyone at the pep rally. Suddenly, a calm, authoritative voice cut through her frantic thoughts. "What's going on here?" Sarah spun around. Standing a few feet behind her was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, powerfully built, with an intensity in his eyes that made her pause. He wasn't a teacher, nor a parent she recognized from school events, but there was something about his presence, a quiet strength, that commanded attention. It was Captain David Thorne. He had heard Sarah's frantic calls, sensing the urgency in her voice. His eyes, sharp and analytical, quickly assessed the situation: a distressed girl, a locked restroom door, and the faint sounds of struggle within. He immediately understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a schoolyard prank. "They've got my brother," Sarah blurted out, her voice cracking with emotion. "Mark Jensen and his friends. They locked him in there. He has special needs. They're hurting him." Thorne's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the door, then the surrounding hallway. His mind, trained for combat, was already running through scenarios, assessing vulnerabilities and potential threats. He knew time was of the essence. He had already made the call, and his team would be here soon, but a minute felt like an eternity. "What's your brother's name?" Thorne asked, his voice low and steady, a calming anchor in Sarah's storm. "Ethan," Sarah whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Ethan Miller." Thorne felt a jolt. Miller, the name he had been searching for, the name that had haunted his thoughts for years. This was too much of a coincidence. His personal mission and this urgent crisis were colliding in an unexpected and terrifying way. He pushed the personal aside, focusing solely on the immediate threat. He stepped towards the door, his movements fluid and purposeful. He placed a hand on the cold wood, feeling for any vibrations, listening intently. He could hear the faint sounds of taunting, of Ethan's distressed breathing. He knew he couldn't wait. His team, while incredibly fast, might not be fast enough. "Step back," Thorne told Sarah, his voice still calm, but with an underlying edge of command. Sarah, startled by his sudden shift in demeanor, instinctively took a step back. She watched, mesmerized, as he took a stance, his body poised, radiating controlled power. Inside the restroom, Mark, Vince, and Chad continued their torment. They had pushed Ethan into a corner, making him stumble. Look at him, shaking like a leaf. Mark laughed, towering over Ethan. "What's wrong?" "Miller's scared of a little dark gonna call for your mommy." Ethan was on the verge of hyperventilating. His entire body trembled, his hands flapping wildly, his eyes wide and unfocused. The sensory overload, compounded by the fear and humiliation, was pushing him to the brink of a complete meltdown. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make them disappear, trying to make the world go away. Suddenly, a loud, sharp thud echoed through the restroom, rattling the very walls. It wasn't a bang, not a kick. It was something else, something far more powerful and deliberate, the sound of solid wood splintering. The bullies froze, their cruel laughter dying on their lips. They exchanged uneasy glances. What was that? Then, with another powerful crack, the lock on the door gave way, ripped from its frame. The heavy wooden door swung inward with a groan, revealing a silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. The figure stepped into the restroom, and the bully's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the man Sarah had been talking to. He moved with an almost unnerving silence, his posture rigid, his gaze sweeping the room with an intensity that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Thorne's eyes, honed by years of assessing threats, immediately locked onto Ethan, huddled in the corner, trembling. Then, he focused on the three bullies. His voice, when he spoke, was low and guttural, carrying the weight of command and a chilling undertone of lethal intent. "Step away from him," Thorne commanded. His words not a request, but an order. His eyes, previously assessing, now burned with a cold, unwavering fury. Mark, recovering from his initial shock, puffed out his chest. "Who the hell are you?" He blustered, trying to regain his composure. "This is school property. You can't just bust in here." Thorne took another step into the room, his presence filling the confined space. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer force of his presence seemed to push the air out of the room. "I asked you to step away," he repeated, his voice laced with an undeniable authority. Last warning. Vince and Chad, sensing the palpable danger emanating from Thorne, began to shift nervously. They had seen Mark intimidate countless students, but this was different. This man wasn't intimidated. He was terrifying. Mark, however, blinded by his own arrogance and the shock of the unexpected intrusion, tried to assert his dominance. Or what? Old man. "You gonna cry to your mommy?" He took a step towards Thorne, a foolish display of bravado. Thorne's movements were swift, precise, and utterly devoid of wasted motion. In a blur, he moved past Mark's clumsy attempt to intimidate him. He didn't touch Mark. Not yet. Instead, he reached out, his hand grasping the doorframe that Mark had just ripped open. With a quiet, almost imperceptible twist of his wrist, Thorne tore off a jagged splinter of wood from the broken frame, holding it loosely in his fingers. The ease with which he had done it, the sheer, raw strength displayed, sent a ripple of fear through the bullies. Mark froze, his eyes fixed on the splinter, then on Thorne's unblinking gaze. The door was locked, Thorne stated, his voice a low growl, "Meaning you trapped a minor here, and you were harassing him. That's kidnapping and assault." He then, with another quiet, deliberate movement, squeezed the splinter in his hand. The wood cracked and crumbled into dust, falling from his fingers. The sound of the splinter disintegrating was far more effective than any punch. It was a silent, chilling demonstration of overwhelming power. Mark's face, which had been contorted in defiance, paled. Vince and Chad took a terrified step back, bumping into each other. They finally understood. This man was not just some random adult. He was dangerous. "Now," Thorne said, his eyes still fixed on Mark, "step away from the boy. Slowly." Mark, his bravado completely evaporated, swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously between Thorne and the open door. He took a hesitant step back, then another, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Vince and Chad followed suit, their faces etched with pure terror. Thorne didn't take his eyes off them. He moved towards Ethan, his presence a comforting shield. He knelt down, his voice softening, though still firm. "Ethan, are you all right?" Ethan, still trembling, looked up at Thorne, his eyes wide. He slowly nodded, unable to form words, but the sheer relief in his eyes was palpable. He felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of safety, a profound calm settling over him in the man's presence. Just then, the sound of heavy, disciplined footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The door swung open further, and two more figures, also dressed in casual civilian clothes but moving with the same synchronized, precise movements as Thorne, entered the restroom. They were lean, formidable, and their eyes scanned the room with the same intense, analytical gaze as Thorne's. They were a part of his team, the first of his backup. Mark, Vince, and Chad, seeing the new arrivals, gasped. These weren't just random adults. These were men who moved with a purpose, with a quiet threat that was unnerving. They looked like something out of a movie. Like soldiers. The bullies instinctively pressed themselves against the far wall, their faces ashen. Thorne glanced at his arriving comrades. A brief, silent acknowledgement. "Secure the perimeter. No one in. No one out," he ordered. The two men nodded, their movements efficient as they positioned themselves at the entrance and within the hallway, creating an impenetrable barrier. Thorne then turned back to Ethan. As their eyes met, a spark of recognition, fleeting but profound, passed between them. It wasn't just the relief of a rescued victim. It was something deeper, something familiar. Thorne's gaze lingered on Ethan's face, a flicker of a long-buried memory surfacing. The Miller name, the blue eyes. It was too much to be a coincidence. The personal mission he was on was suddenly, terrifyingly, standing right in front of him, in the form of this frightened, special needs boy. The tension in the restroom was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark, Vince, and Chad stood pressed against the wall, their earlier bravado replaced by sheer terror. They watched, wide-eyed, as two more men, just as imposing and silent as Thorne, took up positions, effectively sealing off the room. It was like a scene from a military movie, but terrifyingly real. Thorne, meanwhile, gently helped Ethan to his feet. Ethan, still trembling, leaned into the unexpected comfort of Thorne's presence. He looked up at Thorne, his large blue eyes searching, and a faint whisper escaped his lips. "Uncle David." The words hung in the air, a stunning revelation that silenced even the terrified bullies. Sarah, who had rushed in after Thorne's team secured the door, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with shock, locked onto Thorne. "Uncle David, is that really you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thorne froze. The name, spoken by Ethan, then by Sarah, confirmed his deepest suspicion. He hadn't seen them in years, not since a tragic and unforeseen circumstance had pulled him away from their lives. The reason for his mission to Westmont High, the vague address he'd been given, the name Miller, it all clicked into place with a heartbreaking clarity. He was here looking for his sister's children, his niece and nephew, after receiving an anonymous tip about their situation, a tip that felt like a lifeline thrown from a past he thought was long gone. He knelt fully, bringing himself to Ethan's eye level. He gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan," he said, his voice softer now, laced with a warmth that hadn't been present moments before. "It's me. It's David. I'm here." His eyes, though still intense, held a profound sadness, mixed with an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. Ethan, seeing the familiar warmth in Thorne's eyes, a warmth he vaguely remembered from distant, happier childhood memories, slowly relaxed. He leaned into Thorne's embrace, finding solace in the strong, steady arms of the man who had just appeared like a guardian angel. Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, rushed forward and threw her arms around Thorn. "Uncle David, we thought you were gone for good." Her voice was choked with emotion, a mix of relief, anger, and years of unspoken grief. Thorn held her close, his eyes scanning the room, never quite leaving the terrified faces of the bullies. "I'm here now. Sarah, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." His gaze hardened as he looked at Mark Jensen, a silent promise of retribution. He gently disengaged from Sarah and Ethan, standing to face the still paralyzed bullies. His voice, once again, was clipped and authoritative, the warmth replaced by a steely resolve. "All right, gentlemen, let's start over. What exactly were you doing to my nephew?" Mark, still reeling from the shock of the man's identity and his sudden, overwhelming presence, stammered. We weren't doing anything. He's lying. He just gets upset easily." "Liar," Sarah interjected, stepping forward, her anger flaring. "You trapped him in here. You broke the lock. You were making fun of him, saying horrible things." Thorn raised a hand, silencing Sarah with a calm gesture. His eyes remained fixed on Mark. "I saw the door. I heard the sounds. And I have 2 witnesses right here." He gestured subtly to his 2 SEAL comrades, who stood like silent sentinels, their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable but menacing. The implied threat was clear. Mark looked desperately at Vince and Chad, hoping for support, but they averted their gazes, their faces pale. They knew they were caught. "You pushed him against the wall, Mark," Thorne stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet chillingly precise. "You physically assaulted him, you verbally abused him, and you did all of this in a locked room, effectively kidnapping him. Do you understand the implications of that?" Mark's eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for an escape. He was no longer the dominant bully. He was a cornered animal. "No, I didn't. It was just a joke. We were just messing around." "A joke?" Thorne scoffed, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. "Does my nephew look like he's laughing? Mark, does he look like he's messing around?" He gestured towards Ethan, who was still visibly shaken, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed. Just then, the outer door of the restroom opened, and a stern-faced woman in a sensible pantsuit stepped in. It was Principal Thompson, alerted by the commotion and the unusual sight of several intimidating men in the hallway. "What in the world is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes widening as she took in the scene, the broken door, the terrified bullies, Sarah, Ethan, and the imposing presence of Thorne and his team. Thorne turned, his demeanor shifting slightly, a practiced ease in transitioning from military precision to civilian authority. "Principal Thompson, I presume." His voice was calm, professional. "I am Captain David Thorne. These are my colleagues. We intervened in a serious situation." Principal Thompson's eyes narrowed, taking in Thorne's confident posture and the disciplined stance of the other men. She recognized authority when she saw it, even if it wasn't in uniform. "Captain Thorne, what situation are you referring to, and why are you and your colleagues on school property?" Thorne's gaze swept over the bullies, then settled back on the principal. "These 3 individuals," he said, gesturing to Mark, Vince, and Chad, "trapped my nephew, Ethan Miller, in this restroom. They broke the lock, physically assaulted him, and subjected him to severe emotional and verbal abuse. Given that Ethan has special needs, this constitutes a hate crime. Principal, and I assure you, it's not just a schoolyard prank." Principal Thompson gasped, her face blanching. She knew about Ethan's struggles, and she knew about Mark Jensen's reputation, but she had never imagined it would escalate to this. "A hate crime, Captain. That's a very serious accusation." "It is. Thorne agreed, his voice unwavering. "And I am prepared to press charges. My colleagues and I are trained military personnel. We observed the situation, and we intervened. We have ample testimony from my niece, Sarah, and from Ethan himself. And frankly, Principal, the state of that door is evidence enough." He gestured to the splintered frame. Mark, recovering a sliver of his arrogance, tried to interject. "He's lying. He's just trying to get us in trouble." Thorne's eyes snapped to Mark, a cold, dangerous glint in them. "You think you can bully your way out of this? Mark. You think you can lie your way out of assault and kidnapping charges? You made a very grave mistake today." He then turned to Principal Thompson. "Principal, I suggest you call the local authorities immediately, and I expect these three to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Not just a 2-day suspension this time." Principal Thompson, faced with the undeniable evidence and the unwavering authority of Captain Thorne, knew she was in a serious predicament. This was far beyond typical school discipline. "Of course, Captain. I'll call the police at once." She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed. As she made the call, Thorne looked at Ethan, then at Sarah. He could see the years of fear and frustration in their eyes. This was more than just an incident. It was the culmination of prolonged suffering. He knew he had to protect them, not just today, but going forward. The unexpected reunion with his family, under such dire circumstances, had solidified his resolve. He would ensure that justice, true justice, was served. The arrival of Principal Thompson, followed swiftly by the local police, transformed the tense scene in the restroom into a maelstrom of official procedure. Captain David Thorne, with the unwavering support of his 2 silent SEAL companions, calmly and methodically recounted the events, his voice devoid of emotion, yet each word carrying the weight of indisputable truth. He described the broken lock, the confined space, the emotional distress of Ethan, and the clear intent of the bullies. Sarah, still visibly shaken but fueled by a protective fury, corroborated every detail, her voice cracking with the raw pain of years of watching her brother suffer. Mark, Vince, and Chad, once masters of intimidation, now crumbled under the scrutiny of authority. Their attempts to lie and deflect were easily dismantled by Thorne's precise account. His military background gave his statements an undeniable credibility, while his composed demeanor starkly contrasted with the bullies' panicked stammering. They quickly realized their usual tactics of denial and counteraccusation wouldn't work on a man like Thorne, or the officers who listened intently, recognizing the gravity of the situation. "We were just joking around, he's sensitive," Mark blurted out, trying one last desperate attempt to minimize his actions. Thorne's eyes, cold and unflinching, met Mark's. "Joking? Is that what you call trapping a child with special needs, verbally abusing him, and physically shoving him against a wall? That's not a joke. Son, that's a criminal offense." The police officers, led by Sergeant Miller, no relation to Ethan and Sarah, but a veteran officer known for his no-nonsense approach, began to take statements. Sergeant Miller looked at Thorne, his expression one of quiet respect. "Captain Thorne, you've handled this with exemplary professionalism. We appreciate your intervention." "My nephew was in danger." Thorne responded simply, his gaze softening briefly as he looked at Ethan, who was now clinging to Sarah's hand. "That was my only concern." Principal Thompson, having witnessed the entire exchange, felt a profound sense of shame. She had known about Mark Jensen's bullying tendencies, but she had consistently underestimated the severity of his actions, opting for mild disciplinary measures that had only emboldened him. Now, faced with the potential legal repercussions and the sheer brutality of the incident, she understood her profound failure. "This is unacceptable." "Mark," Principal Thompson stated, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and regret, "you are suspended indefinitely, pending a full police investigation and a board review. Vince, Chad, the same applies to both of you." But Thorne wasn't satisfied with just a school suspension. "Principal," he interjected, his voice firm, "with all due respect, these are not just disciplinary issues. This is a pattern of behavior. I've seen this before. Bullies like this don't just target one child. They create a climate of fear." Sergeant Miller nodded in agreement. "Captain Thorne is right. We've had a few anonymous reports about Jensen's behavior, but nothing concrete enough to act on. Until now." He then turned to the bullies. "Mark Jensen, Vince Moretti, Chad Donovan, you are being taken into custody. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The bullies, their faces ashen, watched in horror as the officers produced handcuffs. The sight of the cold metal clicking around Mark's wrists was a moment of profound, almost poetic justice. Mark, who had terrorized so many, was now utterly helpless. His arrogance stripped away. He tried to protest, but a firm hand from an officer silenced him. As the police led the subdued bullies away, the tension in the restroom slowly began to dissipate. Sarah hugged Ethan tightly, tears of relief now replacing those of fear. "It's over. Eth. It's really over." Thorne watched them, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. He had found his family, but under such harrowing circumstances, he knew he owed them an explanation, a lifetime of explanations. Principal Thompson approached Thorne, her shoulders slumped. "Captain Thorne, I don't know what to say. I am so sorry this happened on my watch. We will review all our anti-bullying policies. This will never happen again." Thorne simply nodded. "Ensure it doesn't, Principal. A school should be a safe haven for all its students, especially those who are most vulnerable." His words, calm yet authoritative, left no doubt about his expectations. Later that evening, after the police had left and the school had quieted down, Thorne drove Sarah and Ethan home. The small, familiar house, nestled on a quiet street, felt like a distant memory to Thorne. He hadn't been back in years. Their parents, his sister and brother-in-law, were still deployed. Their absence had created a void, and Thorne felt a pang of regret for the years he hadn't been there for them. Inside the living room, a palpable awkwardness hung in the air, mixed with overwhelming relief. Sarah, having given Ethan a warm cup of cocoa, sat beside him on the sofa, clutching his hand. Ethan, exhausted but finally safe, was quietly absorbed in counting the patterns on the rug. Thorne took a deep breath. "Sarah, Ethan," he began, his voice soft but firm. "I know you have questions, many of them." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm sorry I haven't been in your lives. There's a lot I need to explain. Years ago, after a very difficult mission, I was involved in an incident. It was a dark time. I felt I needed to disappear, to cut ties. I thought I was protecting you by staying away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "Mom and Dad told us you were... They said you were a hero. And then you just vanished. We missed you. Uncle David. I missed you too," Thorne confessed, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "More than you'll ever know." He looked at Ethan, who was now slowly turning his head to listen, his expression earnest. "I received an anonymous tip, a message from an old friend, about your parents being deployed, and about some difficulties here. It was vague, but it was enough to bring me back. I had to know if you were okay." He didn't mention the specifics of the bullying, only that he'd been worried about their well-being. "So, you just showed up?" Sarah asked, a flicker of disbelief. "Just like that. And then, a Navy SEAL team shows up." Thorne almost smiled. "Not exactly a team. Those were two of my former comrades, men I trust with my life. We have a network. When I saw the situation, I called for immediate support. They were nearby, responding to another training exercise. A cover, really, and came immediately. We look out for each other. He explained, in broad strokes, his life as a SEAL, the intensity of their training, the nature of their missions. He talked about the bonds of brotherhood, the unwavering loyalty. He spoke of his own struggles, the invisible scars of war that had driven him away. His honesty, raw and unvarnished, resonated deeply with Sarah. "You're still a hero, Uncle David," Ethan suddenly mumbled, looking directly at Thorne. It was rare for Ethan to initiate direct conversation, especially with such clarity. "You saved me." Thorne's eyes softened completely. He reached out and gently ruffled Ethan's hair. "You're the brave one, Ethan. You endured more than anyone should, and you're strong." The evening passed with more shared stories, more explanations, and the tentative rebuilding of a family bond that had been fractured for too long. Thorne promised to stay, to help them through the aftermath of the bullying, and to be there for them in the future. He made a silent vow to himself never again would he let his past dictate his presence in their lives. He was home, and this time, he would stay. The arrest of Mark Jensen, Vince Moretti, and Chad Donovan sent shockwaves through Westmont High. The incident, once a hushed secret of the bullied, now exploded into public view. News channels picked up the story, focusing on the dramatic intervention of a decorated Navy SEAL and the subsequent charges of assault and kidnapping. The school, previously seen as a microcosm of teenage dramas, found itself under an intense spotlight. For Ethan, the immediate aftermath was a delicate balance of overwhelming relief and lingering anxiety. The constant dread that had clouded his days began to lift, but the scars of years of torment weren't easily erased. He still flinched at sudden loud noises, and crowded hallways remained a challenge. Yet, there was a new lightness in his step, a subtle shift in his usually cautious demeanor. He found solace in the quiet presence of Uncle David, who had, true to his word, become a constant fixture in their lives. David Thorne, having unexpectedly reconnected with his family, felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The anonymity he had sought after his last harrowing mission, the self-imposed exile, now felt like a misguided penance. He had missed so much. He saw the quiet strength in Sarah, the resilience in Ethan, and he felt a fierce desire to protect them, to compensate for the lost years. His explanation to Sarah and Ethan about his past, though simplified, had opened a door to healing. Sarah, initially guarded, slowly began to share her own anxieties, the burden of being Ethan's primary protector, the fear of what might have happened if Thorne hadn't arrived. She recounted the countless times she had tried to intervene, only to be dismissed by school officials or ridiculed by the bullies. Thorne listened intently, his heart aching with regret for not being there. "I just felt so helpless sometimes. Uncle David," Sarah confessed one evening, sitting in the quiet living room after Ethan had gone to bed. "Like I was fighting a losing battle. And the school. They just didn't get it. They didn't understand how deeply it affected Ethan." Thorne placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know, Sarah, and I'm sorry you had to carry that burden alone. It should never have been your responsibility." His voice was low, filled with genuine remorse. "But you're incredibly strong. You protected him. Fiercely. And that takes more courage than anything I've ever done." He then delved deeper into the specifics of his unexpected return. The anonymous tip he had received wasn't just vague. It was chillingly precise about a general sense of distress at Westmont High, mentioning specific vulnerabilities for a special needs student named Ethan Miller. The message had been sent through an encrypted, untraceable channel, a ghost from his past, perhaps an old contact, or even someone observing the family from afar, who knew just enough to trigger his concern. He had interpreted it as a desperate cry for help, a sign that something was seriously wrong. The address given was their home address, confirming the identity of his long-lost family. "I couldn't ignore it," Thorne explained. "It was like a call I couldn't unhear. And when I saw you, Sarah, and heard your voice outside that restroom, I knew. I just knew. The school, under intense pressure from the media and the legal ramifications of the incident, began a rigorous internal review. Principal Thompson, shaken to her core, initiated sweeping changes. Mark, Vince, and Chad were permanently expelled. Their parents, facing potential legal action and widespread public condemnation, were forced to confront the dark reality of their son's behavior. The community, outraged by the details of the bullying, rallied behind Ethan and Sarah. In the ensuing weeks, therapy sessions became a crucial part of Ethan's healing process. Thorne attended some of them, offering quiet support. He learned more about autism, about sensory processing, about the unique challenges and gifts that came with Ethan's neurodiversity. He saw Ethan's incredible memory, his logical mind, his pure heart. He began to understand the quiet suffering Ethan had endured, and his resolve to ensure justice and safety for both Ethan and Sarah only deepened. The legal process for Mark, Vince, and Chad was swift and unforgiving. Thorne's meticulously detailed testimony, combined with Sarah's emotional account and Principal Thompson's remorseful acknowledgement of the school's prior inaction, painted a damning picture. The charges of assault and kidnapping, particularly given Ethan's special needs, were taken very seriously. The public outrage fueled the prosecution, demanding accountability. Mark Jensen, the instigator, faced the harshest penalties. His reputation, once built on intimidation, was shattered, replaced by public scorn. His future, once seemingly limitless due to his family's wealth, was now irrevocably tarnished. Meanwhile, Thorne also used his vast network and resources to ensure that the anonymous tipster who brought him back was never identified, protecting their anonymity. He knew that revealing their identity might put them in danger, especially if they were someone within the school or community who feared retaliation from the bullies' families. He also discreetly investigated the extent of Mark's past bullying, unearthing stories from other students who had been too afraid to come forward. This information, when presented to the school board and the police, further solidified the case against the bullies, revealing a pattern of misconduct that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The Miller home, once a quiet refuge for two siblings navigating adulthood alone, was now filled with the comfortable rhythms of a family rediscovered. Thorne spent his days helping Sarah with college applications, teaching Ethan self-defense techniques that were more about confidence and situational awareness than aggression, and simply being present. He took them on hikes, taught Ethan how to fish, and shared stories of his travels. He became the stable, unwavering male presence they had desperately needed. One afternoon, while sorting through old family albums, Sarah found a faded photograph. It showed a much younger David Thorne, in his military uniform, holding a tiny Ethan in his arms, a wide, joyful smile on his face. Next to him, a younger version of their mother beamed proudly. The picture was a poignant reminder of the loving family they once were, and a testament to the profound connection that had been severed but now, miraculously, was being rebuilt. "You really were here for us, Uncle David," Sarah murmured, tracing the figures in the photo. "Even when we didn't know it." Thorne looked at the photo, a wistful expression on his face. "I should have been here, Sarah. And I promise you, I won't ever leave again." His years of silent suffering and self-imposed exile had finally found their purpose. Not in combat, but in the quiet, profound act of being family. The path to healing for Ethan was long, but it was now paved with unwavering support and understanding. He started to thrive, his unique intellect finding new avenues for expression, his once fragile confidence slowly blossoming into a quiet strength. The fear of the bullies was replaced by the knowledge that he was protected, loved, and finally, truly safe. The ripple effect of the restroom incident extended far beyond the immediate arrests and expulsions. Westmont High, once notorious for its lax approach to bullying, underwent a profound transformation. Under pressure from the community, the school board, and Captain Thorne's persistent advocacy, Principal Thompson spearheaded a comprehensive overhaul of their anti-bullying policies. Mandatory sensitivity training was implemented for all staff and students, focusing on understanding neurodiversity and fostering an inclusive environment. A new anonymous reporting system was established, ensuring that students felt safe to report harassment without fear of retaliation. The culture of silence that had long protected bullies like Mark Jensen was finally shattered. For Mark, Vince, and Chad, the consequences were severe. Mark, as the primary instigator, faced the full brunt of the law. His wealthy parents, despite their best efforts to leverage their influence, couldn't escape the mounting evidence and public outrage. Mark was convicted of assault and unlawful detention, receiving a significant sentence that reflected the gravity of his actions, especially given Ethan's vulnerability. Vince and Chad, though receiving lesser sentences, also faced legal repercussions that irrevocably altered their futures. Their social standing, once built on fear, crumbled into ignominy. Ethan's journey of healing was a testament to his resilience and the unwavering support of his family. With Uncle David by his side, he began to attend a specialized therapy program that helped him process the trauma and develop coping mechanisms for sensory overload and social anxiety. Slowly, painstakingly, the emotional scars began to fade. He found his voice, not just in therapy, but in life. His unique perspective, once a source of vulnerability, became a wellspring of strength. He discovered a newfound confidence, fueled by the knowledge that he was safe and valued. Ethan, the quiet boy who once hid from the world, began to flourish. He joined the school's robotics club, his brilliant mind excelling in the complex designs and programming. He even, tentatively at first, started to mentor younger students with special needs, sharing his experiences and offering a beacon of hope. His courage in facing his bullies, and his resilience in recovery, made him an unexpected quiet hero within the school community. Sarah, too, found a new sense of purpose. The burden of being Ethan's sole protector had been immense, and with Thorne's return, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She focused on her academic pursuits, excelling in her studies, and was accepted into her dream university. Her bond with Ethan, strengthened by shared adversity, became an unbreakable pillar of their lives. She continued to be his fiercest advocate. But now, she had an ally, a family, in Uncle David. Captain David Thorne, the decorated Navy SEAL who had arrived like a whirlwind of justice, made a life-altering decision. He decided to stay. The impersonal life of a lone wolf, forever chasing shadows of his past, no longer held an appeal. He had found his purpose in the quiet rhythms of family life, in being an uncle, a guardian, a mentor. He fully embraced his role, a stable presence for Ethan and Sarah as they navigated their young lives. He leveraged his extensive network and resources, not for combat, but for community building. Thorne opened a discreet, non-profit training facility in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a military camp, but a place where at-risk youth could find discipline, mentorship, and a sense of belonging. He taught them self-defense, leadership skills, and the importance of respect and empathy. Ethan, in time, became a regular at the facility, not just as a student, but as an inspiration. His story a powerful reminder of resilience. The Miller family, once fractured by duty and circumstance, was whole again. Their parents, upon returning from deployment, were overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion. They witnessed the transformation in their children, the new confidence in Ethan, the quiet strength in Sarah, and the steadfast presence of David. The family spent evenings together, sharing laughter, stories, and the quiet comfort of being reunited. The Patek Philippe Grand Complications, 6300 G0 Oroala 1, donated by Elias Romero to the Hospicio del Buen Samaritano, remained a symbol of unexpected benevolence, a silent testament to the good that could emerge from unseen places. Though completely unrelated to Thorne's story, it served as a subtle echo of the theme that heroes could come in any form, from any background. The story of Ethan Miller became a beacon of hope at Westmont High, and beyond. It was a powerful reminder that outward appearances can be deceiving, that the quietest among us can possess immense strength, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, can indeed prevail. The school, once a place of fear for many, became a model of inclusivity and compassion, a direct result of the terrifying, yet ultimately transformative, incident in the restroom. Ethan, once the bullied special needs kid, walked the halls of Westmont High with his head held high. No longer a victim, but an inspiration. He had faced his demons, found his voice, and discovered an unexpected protector and mentor in his uncle. The bullies had tried to trap him, but instead, they had unwittingly set him free, unleashing a chain of events that led to a new horizon for him, his family, and his community. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful tales of justice and unexpected heroes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.